Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from narcissistic relationships and making sense of the whole mess. So let's take on this question. Did narcissistic abuse make me into an introvert, or is it really who I am? So just sit with that question for a minute, and as you sit and mull that over, I'm just going to take a quick minute to remind you that if you don't know this already, I have a brand new book coming out on February 20th. It's called It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People. Please pre-order it. I'm asking all of my subscribers on YouTube to consider checking it out. Anyone who pre-orders the book not only will get the book, but you'll also, if you want to verify your purchase with us, you'll get access to so many other goodies that we're giving away. And almost a 6-hour course on gaslighting and a series of expert interviews, access to a special Facebook community dedicated to the book launch and the content of it. You'll also get early access to chapter 2. So the links to everything, the link to order, the link to verify your purchase, all of that's in the video description. Okay, so the book's on healing. It's on helping you heal. It gets it down in writing. It's great to listen on YouTube, but it's also nice to have it on paper, pencil, or screen right in front of you. So let's go back to the idea of this video, right? Did narcissistic abuse make me an introvert or make you an introvert, or is it who you are? So I got this panicked question from someone who said to me, I don't know if I am just scared of people or if I actually prefer being alone. She said that I prefer being alone. I avoid large crowds. I can be in them when I need to. She's not agoraphobic, but she said, I don't like going out. I prefer being home with my pup, with my dog. She said that the isolation of the pandemic was actually not that hard for her. She would feel exhausted after protracted long meetings or in-person days at work. So the person who brought this issue to my attention was a person with a long history of narcissistic relationships. She had a vulnerable narcissistic mother and a father who vacillated between malignant narcissistic behavior and just being absent. She learned to silence herself long ago, and her mother from an early age viewed her daughter as either an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with, or a person to meet her needs. Her mother was very critical, and her father's menacing rage kept everyone in the family in line. He didn't even need to say anything. He could control everyone in the family by the potential of the harm he could cause. Her eldest brother was the golden child, her younger sister was the invisible child, and the person asking me the question was sort of in a truth-teller scapegoat situation. When she got older, like in her early 20s, she had a nice boyfriend for about 18 months. She thought she had finally found her escape from the family system. She and the boyfriend planned to move far from her family, and he was starting graduate school, and she was planning on finding a job in the new city. He was killed by a drunk driver. She went on after that to a series of mediocre relationships, and she ended up in a long-term relationship with a vulnerable narcissist who had heavy self-righteous vibes, whose love bombing was to empathize with her, interestingly, about the difficulties she's had with her mother. He talked to her at length about her mother. He told her, I get it, it's so hard. But then down the road, he shamed her about her relationship with her mother. He was very controlling about money, even though she made more money than him. He would get more emotion about a dish that wasn't properly washed in the sink than he got about the day she lost her job or the day she had a miscarriage. He criticized her friends, and she was afraid he would say something hurtful or embarrassing in front of them, so she withdrew from a lot of her social supports, and she would welcome the rare time she was able to see them without him. But between work and kids and the miseries of life with this man, the opportunities to have those supports were few and far between. She did have children with her narcissistic spouse. Ultimately, they went through a difficult divorce, and now the kids are older, and one child grew up to be their father's defender and has some vulnerable narcissistic qualities himself. The other child continues to struggle with anxiety. Her career was fine. The distractions and the drama of her spouse and his passive aggression and not having sufficient support with their children meant that her career didn't really flourish, although she's very smart, but it paid the bills and it kept her busy and again, distracted. This woman told me that her primary relationships, her parents, her spouse, her siblings, and their families, were all about doing. So supply in her family meant making sure that the trains ran on time. She was always acting as sort of a functionary or a sort of family butler. It means ensuring everyone is okay. Because if they weren't okay, if everything wasn't working well, the toxic stuff that would be spewed at her would be such a headache. And for years, she believed their one-sided, gaslighted rhetoric. So other people felt exhausting to her, something to have to deal with, a problem to be fixed. Other people for her meant she had to silence herself. And she would always be a little worried about whether the other person was okay. Then on top of that, both her mother and her ex-husband would often get in digs to her about what they'd often tell her was how she was sort of socially awkward. She's actually a really gregarious, warm, funny, very appropriate, kind of really fun person. She wasn't odd, but she had been told that she said things wrong and she did things wrong and that she looked foolish so many times by them, by such loud primary voices in her life, that she started to believe it. When this woman looked back at her life, she said her natural tendency that she could look back and remember was that she did enjoy being around people, but that there was this physical response she would feel when she was around people, that they're going to need something, that other people meant that you cannot relax, that you had to be acutely aware of their needs, that your own needs could not be expressed or met, or at least they were made secondary, that she would say the wrong thing. So she thought, to hell with it. It's easier to be home with her old dog, TV shows that she liked, books that she loved to read. But this whole thing, going back to the point of the videos, it left her confused. She said, am I an introvert? Do I prefer being alone? After all these relationships, she said she didn't know. She remembered all those years ago when she was first on her own, for that brief period of her life when she was with a man she actually loved, that she loved being with people. She laughed. She remembered them having parties. She took classes. She had friends that she saw often. She literally didn't understand, after a lifetime of this narcissistic stuff, who she was or what she preferred anymore. That long story I told you is a long way to get into how we get shaped in ways that can feel permanent by long-term narcissistic relationships. And this is really pronounced when it comes to patterns like sociality, like, interacting with other people, which is different from introversion. Introversion is a preference not to be alone, but usually in smaller social groups, and also comfortable in one's mind. Thinking introverts do spend time in their minds, thinking, engaged in intellectual or interiorized pursuits like reading or writing. Those activities are engaging, and doing them for a naturally introverted person in solitude is soothing. Introverts can absolutely successfully socialize, but may find that lots of in-person time with people can be depleting, and may feel that they may need a second to rest after an intense day of meetings or gatherings and the like. But when people have been through narcissistic relationships, the role of other people gets very confusing. For most folks, these relationships, for most folks who have been in narcissistic relationships mean doing and doing and doing and doing, and appeasing and holding back and having to be careful, and a sort of chronic state of tension, because you never know when you would say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. It's not that you were saying or doing the wrong thing, it's just that you'd say the thing that they're so hypersensitive that they would snap over. Now, over time, you can see how all of this can get generalized to all social interactions. And because most people in narcissistic relationships are either isolated or told that they sound dumb when they are with other people, also part of that isolating dynamic, there is a slow process of no longer really having good social interactions but instead only having the high stress, depleting, inhibited, can't be yourself, you will never get a need met, but have to meet theirs and accommodate to everything they want world that evolves when you are in significant primary narcissistic relationships, most often family members, especially those you see regularly, and partners. Over time, to make one of these relationships work, we have to give up on ourselves, abandon our true natures, either that or get into fights every day about everything. If we do keep trying to hold on to our true nature while we are in a narcissistic relationship, the conflict, manipulation, dismissiveness, and mockery would exhaust just about any normal human being. When we relent or give in these relationships, we aren't weak. We just need to get through our days and do the stuff that matters to us. And having to prove whether or not we remembered some random thing they told us 3 months ago isn't worth it. So we just give in. That's how it happens. So the wanting to be alone that I often observe in survivors of narcissistic relationships like this woman may not be introversion as much as it is a physiological response and a psychological response of needing time down from the hypervigilance and monitoring and hyper-alertness to let your sympathetic nervous system rest, to meet your own needs without the pressure of putting other people's needs and preferences first, or being expected to do that, of not being on watch and concerned about being mocked for what you say. So many survivors of narcissistic abuse will tell me that the time alone becomes a necessity and it's cherished. So it leaves them wondering if they became introverted, even though they look back at a history when they once really enjoyed and thrived when they spent time with people. That's probably not what happened for them, though. The challenge when a person is in narcissistic relationships is that alone is the only place to feel aligned, calm, and safe again. In healthy relationships, that sense of safety and being in your own skin can be experienced with other people, not so much when your world is full of narcissistic folks. If that happens long enough, you crave aloneness. And then, if the narcissistic relationships lasted a long enough time, the aloneness may feel like the safest place and leave a person wondering if actually maybe they're an introvert. Personality is stable, and if it changes when we are adults, it's usually a result of either a head injury or some other central nervous system disease, or recovery from trauma or some majorly intensive therapy, which a person usually got into because of a trauma. And in fact, some people argue that post-traumatic growth may actually simply be post-traumatic personality change. The events that change personality in a significant way tend to be seismic. And one could argue that narcissistic abuse, especially protracted, long-term, multi-year narcissistic abuse, is a seismic event. With time and healing, it may be that a person may have some evolution toward wanting more alone time and even valuing it, especially if you do have to still maintain contact with the narcissistic folks. But if your genuine true nature and personality is extroverted, you may slowly actually grow back into your extroversion. You may have a cautious extroversion because you're more discerning now, but that natural desire you may have to want to be with people and enjoy and flourish in those settings may slowly emerge again. So while I don't believe narcissistic abuse would take an extrovert and turn them into an introvert, it can mean that solitude, time alone, are necessary to heal, to replete, to rest, to grieve, to meet your needs. And for those of us who are introverts and have a history of narcissistic abuse, it can magnify our nature, our enjoyment of aloneness, and multiply it, as that may be the time we need to feel solid on our feet again, recover, and heal. So, yep, narcissistic abuse can break that extrovert in you, but you probably aren't an introvert. And for the introverted folks, it almost becomes natural to crave that aloneness, which is where we always tend to sort of recalibrate anyhow. Thanks again.